Dear Director of the Italian Cultural Institute in Berlin, Luigi Gaetano, Thomas Stellmach from TSPA Architects and Ulrich Goetz from David Chipperfield Architects, both Berlin. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, a very warm welcome to the final presentation of the second cycle of the Premio Berlino. I'm very pleased you all followed the invitation to share the laureate's presentation and discuss with the host architects, but also to celebrate. Let me give a special welcome to Viola Fabi and Valentina Travaglino, the winners of the Premio Berlino cycle 2018-2019. Dear Mr. Gaetano, through the decades, we have developed quite a number of fruitful collaborations with the cultural institutes and ambassadors representing the different nations here in Berlin. The one with your institution, together with the Italian Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is an outstanding one. For nearly 40 years now, ADIS, and for exactly 10 years, the ADIS Network Campus have always seen it as a mission to bring impulses from outside into the city, to discuss them and to provoke a rethinking process. In this respect, the Premio Berlino is another fantastic tool in the direction of this work. The topic of the program and thus the defined task of this day, reuse, requires the willingness to rethink as a prerequisite. It is therefore not only the matter of reusing existing spaces, buildings, and urban locations. It is also about reinterpretation of perception and observation of behavior changes and the needs of civil society in the urban context. Nothing is better suited to invite guests from other cultural areas to take a look at this city, with the cultural experiences and imprints. The Premio Berlino thus creates a perfect synergy. In order to promote contemporary Italian architecture, exchange of experiences and cultural knowledge, the Premio Berlino Award was founded to encourage the internationalization of Italian architecture professionals. It offers two Italian-based emerging architects the opportunity to spend a 6-month period in Berlin for further professional development. Berlin is the ideal place for the Premio Berlino program because reuse since decades was and still is the driver for its development. The destruction through the war, the division, the reunification, its fragmentation. Berlin is constantly reinventing itself by using and reusing existing built structures, by rethinking the voids and reconnecting with new functions. Two prestigious Berlin architecture firms, TSPA and David Chipperfield Architects, known for their success in operating in the fields of reuse and urban revitalization, offered the collaboration and have been the hosts for the winners of this second edition, the young architects Valentina Travaglino and Viola Fabi. Thank you again, Thomas Stellmach from TSPA and Ulrich Goetz from David Chipperfield Architects, for offering this opportunity and for joining us tonight. Before Valentina and Viola will present their work experiences within the two architecture offices and share the impressions and observations obtained during their residence in Berlin with us, it's a pleasure to give now the podium to Director Gaetano. Thank you.
So, Dankeschön, die Kamera. Thank you very much, dear Mr. Kamera. Buonasera, guten Abend, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Berlin is a European capital which could best be defined as a natural laboratory of architecture because of its history and for the creative energies which can be found here. No European city has experienced On the one hand, the devastation, the complete destruction of many neighborhoods, but also the separation of the city into two different political realities. On the other hand, we recognize here the desire to start again, experiment and make the city a place geared towards the future and not towards the past. The historian Karl Schlaffer wrote back in 1910 that Berlin is a city which is forever condemned to become and never to be. Even though he could not have been aware at the time of the tragic future that was looming over the city. Because of its nature, Berlin has attracted, especially during the last 30 years, German and international architects who have left their mark in different ways. For this reason, Berlin is the ideal city to welcome young energy, and that is why the Italian Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided to create the Berlin Prize, a residence for young Italian architects that allows them to spend a 6-month stay in the German capital. The winners thus have the opportunity to work in an architectural firm, getting in touch with the working reality and the architectural scene of the city, and confronting themselves with German and international professionals in their sector. The first edition was launched in 2016, thanks to the collaboration not only with the IIC Berlin, which gladly accepted the proposal of the ministry, but also with the key partnership with one of the most important cultural realities for architecture in Berlin, EDES, a prestigious architectural forum that is at the same time a private gallery, a laboratory, and a place for research and documentation. It is worth saying that EDES has existed now for 30 years and has become part of the history of this city. Following the first presentation, which took place last January, we will hear today from Viola Fabi and Valentina Travaglino, the two winners of the prize. They will describe to us the projects they have carried out in Berlin over the past 6 months and discuss them with the professionals of the two studios that welcome them, Chipperfield and TSPA, to whom we are most grateful for also being partners in this project. We are presently working on the third edition of the prize, whose competition announcement will be published in May. I must say that I am very pleased to be here tonight to present our winners, and I am quite curious to hear their stories and about their projects. Thank you very much.
I would like to talk about tonight about this experience here in Berlin and working at TSPA. This experience allowed me to look at the city in a different way, because it is like always evolving, always changing, and it reflects how the society is and how the society thinks and lives for me. And first, I would like to start from a brief introduction of the office, so TSPA, Thomas Stermark Planning and Architecture. In fact, as you can see in this picture, the office is not only working in the environment of Berlin, but also in all over the world, so with a global network. And I would like to talk about about the process that we use in the project. The projects are based on the key values of the urban sustainable development, and the process is based on discussion and coming together to the solutions. As you can see in this picture, this is like the creative phase of the project, because here we share our ideas and our perception about the changing of some areas of the city, and then discuss together and come to a solution, and then finalizing the project. But what about my work here in Berlin? I would like to start from this map because, as you may know, I come from Naples, but I live currently in Berlin. But I was soon involved in this project in Mozambique about the development of free cities in Mozambique. And it's fun to, this is weird because it was not my personal perception of Berlin that helped me to understand better these cities, but how I looked at these cities and I worked in this project helped me to see the city of Berlin in a different way. I would like to start from a brief overview of the challenges of the country of Mozambique, because the transformation and regenerative process is different because the context is different, as you may imagine, because the country of Mozambique faces different challenges compared to the one that we are used to think. One of these is demography, because there's this high growth rate of population, which is a good thing because it means that population is growing, but at the same time is a bad thing because it affects in a bad way urbanization. And then we have the problem of housing, because we have higher prices and low quality of the buildings because of the lack of infrastructure, the precarious materials that are used in buildings, and then the prices are higher because of most of them are imported from other countries. And the problem of low densification of urban areas because of the widespread practice of the big plots and diffuse buildings with a low density. That of course affects the cost of infrastructure, because as you go far from the urban center, the time travel increase the cost and of infrastructure and housing. And the lack of institutional capacity, because we have a lack of joint between the different institutions and a small access to finances, and a lack of vision of how can these cities change in this context. And last but not least, climate issues, because as you may know, in these days there's this big, huge cyclone in Mozambique that is destroying some of the cities. So it's important to understand which are the adaptive measurement to face this problem. Because the country is always facing the problem of flooding, of heavy rains and cyclones. So, and this is increasing because of the climate change. So the objectives of the project is to implement a strategic urban plan for free cities in Mozambique, in the region of, in the province of Zambezia, in order to achieve a sustainable urban development. And of course, I didn't work alone, but with my team at TSPA, and I was really enriched by this experience to work with people with other ideas, because they come from all over the world. So we share ideas, and then we can achieve a project with this interpenetration between different cultures. And then we have this partner in Mozambique, which is Vocação Técnica. That is basically our on-site partner, which gives us the data that we need for the project. As you may understand, I cannot talk about free cities, so I chose one of them, which is Attimolog, and this is a sketch that shows my perception of the city in a conceptual way. And I will show you this city without showing you the enormous amount of material that we produced these months, because I would like you to get into this project through some images, so you can be part of this amazing and at the same time difficult context. So, as I mentioned before, there's this high presence of young people because this is a consequence of the high rate of growth rate. And but the problem is at the same time of women that are seen as a vulnerable group because they have a low, they are subjected to violence, they have a low rate of literacy, and this results in a lack of knowledge of diseases. For example, like HIV, which is 3 times higher for women than for men. And the economy is basically based on agriculture because we have this fertile land surrounding the city and on trade. As you can see in this picture, this is the core of the city and this Mercato Central. But we have this frequent occurrence of natural hazards, just like floodings. And people try to face these tragic events coming together and solving the problem together, so with a high sense of community and a strong connection with natural resources, because they, for example, if they need water, they go directly to the river because there's a lack of water, as you may imagine, the need of primary source of life. Here in this picture you can see a well with a pipe, which is called in Portuguese fontanário, and when a fontanário is broken or maybe it's too far from a specific household, they go directly to the river. The city is connected to the surrounding city through an important road network because Artomolochi is located between Quelimane, which is the capital of Zambezia, and Nacala, which is an important port that is crossed from by the corridor of Nacala, which is one of the most important economic corridor in Mozambique. And but if you want to go to Artomolochi, you don't have to trust to public transportation system because you can go there through an informal transportation, through some vehicles that are called chapa. And 90% of the built environment is made of informal housing, so informal settlements, because the architecture is very spontaneous. And there's this lack of infrastructure, lack of regulation. But at the same time, this is a strength because we have this strong connection between natural and built environment. So after all of this analysis, we did understand the strengths and the weaknesses of this city that I will show you very briefly, like the connection with Quelimane-Nacala through the National Road, the presence of water bodies that makes this land very fertile, and try to contain the growth of the city. And so the shape of the city is defined by the rivers. And at the same time providing water with the water supply system. And the city is made of multiple centers, like the health center, the administrative one, and the trade one, which are connected through boulevards. And the presence of a transportation hub in the south of the city. The city is surrounded by agricultural fields and forests, and there's this spread of services like primary and secondary schools. But at the same time, we have some weaknesses. For example, the tendency of the city to grow along the main roads, increasing urban sprawling, and so going very far from the center of the city. And this increases the cost of infrastructure and of housing, and determining a fragmented shape of the city. So the settlements are informal, and there the problem of flooding, as we mentioned before, and deforestation. At the same time, the lack of water, because the water supply system is not sufficient, and the lack of connection between different neighborhoods, because sometimes they are only connected by one point, and when a flood comes, this point can be destroyed, and so two parts of the city can be very disconnected. And so the spread of lack of services like hospitals, because the hospital is only located in the north of the city, so the south part of the city has no health centers, and this is a problem. So after all of this analysis, we discussed a bit and came out with some scenarios of development of the city through a workshop that we did just last week. with our partners and specialists that are involved in the project. So I will show you now the first scenario of development of this city, that is called business as usual. So what does it mean? Which will be the development of the city? The city continues growing like it is right now, so with the same density, that is very low. So we will have built area very big, because if you consider that the black square is the total area of the whole municipality with all the green areas, you can understand that the built environment will literally eat all of the green areas. And this is a visualization of this scenario, which is bad, but it's important to understand why it's bad and to let people understand that they continue to grow like this, their environment will be destroyed. So the second scenario is the compact city, and we developed this scenario with the medium density. So with the additional built area a bit low compared to the previous one. And this is the visualization of this scenario, in which we can see how we are trying to propose a compact model of the city, trying to avoid the problem of urban sprawling, and through infill and an expansion regulated through planning strategies and a road network that connects with this kind of ring connection all the neighborhoods, and trying to preserve the shape of the city, which is defined by the river, and with a sort of buffer zone between the built environment and the rivers in order to prevent the risk of flooding and providing public green spaces for people. The last scenario is the satellite city with a higher density, and this is the visualization of this scenario, and we try to make the part of the city that grows around the main city a bit compact and structured, but independent and at the same time well connected to the urban center. And after the definition of these three scenarios, we will decide which one is better for the development of the city, and so try to detail it and going forward with the project. So providing guidelines for the urban transformation and regeneration in a sustainable way of the city. So, but how this project changed my perception of the city of Berlin. Because yes, I'm working in Berlin, but I've been involved in this project in Moloche. But this project, together with my background coming from Naples, helped me to have a different perception of the city. And this part is very important for me because the perception of the city is important because it gives you new ideas about the way that you can act and you can transform a certain area. And I would like to start from this picture that was taken in Moritzplatz in Kreuzberg, and it's near the place where I work, and so it's a kind of familiar environment to me. But I was confused when I was in this part of the city because of the combination between this compact and continuous curtain of buildings that define perfectly the shape of the open space, and in the other hand, these entire plots with more contemporary buildings that define fragmented space. And so the speciality is very different because usually the new buildings are at the edge of the urban centers, not inside of it. And so this was a bit weird to me coming from Naples. And so I started to look at the map of this part of the city and try to apply the same method that we use for the cities in Mozambique. So starting placing on the sketching paper and trying to understand why the structure of the city is so different in the same place. Maybe it can be obvious for some of you, but for me, coming from another environment was not so obvious. So I will show you this sketch, and with this simple sketch you just may understand the difference between these two parts of the same city, because in one side you see how the city is compact and how the city defines the roads and the squares, and in the other hand you see the fragmented space defined by the new, more contemporary architecture, so filled with these green areas. And so I tried to understand why. My first perception was right, but I wanted to know more. And so I started to look at the maps, the old maps. For example, this is from the 30s, and I started to notice how the city was compact, defining perfectly the open spaces. And then this is the map of after the bombing, so you can understand how this part of the city was really bombed, was heavily bombed, and was literally destroyed. So how the city responded to this big destruction? This is the map of the 2010, and you can see how the city responded to this big destruction, building a new city, a city completely different. A city different not only for the buildings that have different specialties, but also a different pattern, because they didn't follow the pattern of the roads that was anyway preserved. So this will to change, to evolve in a completely different way, maybe to go forward and not looking back at the past, is the real key for me to understand Berlin, because it reflects how the society is for me here. And this is very different from Naples, because in Naples we have this big stratification, this big layering of architecture coming from different times of history. And but at the same time we have this big stratification, but we have the preservation of the historic pattern. So the Greek-Roman pattern here of the roads, of the structure is preserved, even if the buildings have been changed through the years. So this is really interesting for me. The difference is that while in Berlin we have this destruction that came out from outside, in Naples this changing has always been intentional, and it was a process, always a natural process of evolving of the city. And so this is a picture that shows for me how is the stratification in Naples, and this is a big value for the city because of this big heritage that we have and comes from the past. But at the same time, it is a big constraint, because we have many blockages to the innovative process. So, in one hand we have Berlin that has been destroyed but has this force to go forward and to innovate. And in the other hand we have Naples, which has this big value, this big heritage, but doesn't know how to go forward. And so it's different from Alto Moloche, because Alto Moloche has a completely different structure. And this is because the city is recent, is growing very fast, and the structure of the city is defined by the natural areas, so by the rivers, and because the buildings, the way that the city is responds to the needs of people, to the primary needs of people that of course are different compared to Berlin. And I would like to close with this image. This is the place where I work, and this is a building that survived from the heavy bombing that we've seen just before. And this represents how the city of Berlin look at the future. So reusing what is existing and adding new elements and creating something new. So with this dynamic dialogue between old and new. So this continued will to change, this continued will to evolve of the city is a reflection of how the society is, because the society is the perfect mirror of the city. And for me, Berlin is like a magnet of new ideas, of new ways of reuse and space and buildings and ever-changing city. And this is why I'm here. And so with this comparison between these three cities, I wanted to explain my perception of the city, comparing it with Naples and using the same method that I use for Alto Moloche. And I would like to encourage you to take part in the exhibition in this other room, to share with me your thoughts, your perception about the city of Alto Moloche. How do you think it can be transformed? And how do you think the city of Berlin can be transformed? And how do you perceive the city based on the experience that you had in other cities, just like I did? And thanks.
give me a short background. What is your background?
From Naples. Yes, I was working in Naples in the field of reuse and regeneration, and I'm expert in landscape and heritage, architectural heritage, and I was involved in some projects about the transformation of the city. For example, in 2017, I was involved in this project for the enhancement and the reuse of the historic center of Sessaurunca in Caserta, and we made this urban plan for the transformation of the city in a dynamic way. So preserving the city doesn't mean that the city must be freezing, but it means that the city must be preserved in the historical and values that it has, so in the memory, but it must look at the future. So this is for me the important in a project. So that's why Berlin was important to me, because it shows how can be a city innovative. Because in Naples we have many ideas of how the city can be changed, but sometimes this is not practically done in the physical world. So this is very interesting for me. And then I joined the other project about reuse and regeneration, and I was currently involved in a project in the city of Naples called Osservatorio Smart City for the district of Naples, in order to achieve a sustainable development and looking at the transformation of the city in a smart way for the district of Naples. And then I came here in Berlin, and that's all.
Good evening, everybody. Let me thank you, first of all, for being here tonight to this closing event for an experience that has been precious for me. And I'm sincerely glad to say it, because Berlin for me didn't only represent a new opportunity, but also a throwback. In fact, Berlin for me has been the very first city that opened up my point of view on the potential impact of reuse within urban transformations. And I had the chance to approach this topic during my 2 years exchange experience in Stuttgart. And during this experience, I had a chance to develop a project in Berlin about the reuse of an abandoned industrial space. And after that, I made treasure of this experience, and I tried to develop it in a different city, Milan, where I've been working and living since 2015. A different city, but at the same time with some similarities. Now I'm not gonna compare the two cities, because we'll need one day or more maybe. But what is interesting to me is that anyhow both Milan and Berlin represent two European cultural and innovation hubs, and this had strong repercussions on how the city changed within the neighborhoods, within the way of living the city, not only due to reuse projects, but also to with regard to impressive redevelopment projects. And what I could learn in Milan, and what I could learn in Berlin compared to Milan, is that although there are some similarities related to dynamics due to gentrification and then neighborhood rearrangement, is that I had a chance to deepen how urban policies are carried out in Milan, and my perception about how the city changed is that in Berlin mostly urban transformation were claimed and followed a bottom-up approach. In Milan, the most meaningful urban transformations happened through policy-driven urban interventions. And I had the chance to deepen this issue thanks to my activity as an architect, but also as a researcher at the Politecnico di Milano, cooperating with public administration for policy definition, but also for obtaining national and European funding for the reuse of public heritage. So, for me, it has been a learning from Milan and a learning from Berlin at the same time. And being here 6 months for me also represented a way to complete somehow my professional profile, because while in Milan I was working a lot with public administration, here with David Chipperfield Architects I had the chance to understand how the other side of our job works, but how it can work and how the role of an architectural officer, an architect, can work cooperating with private without losing the aim of creating the public city or anyway having a positive impact on the immediate neighborhood. And I had the chance of learning this in the Berlin campus, that to me is somehow a manifesto of the philosophy of the office itself. It clearly represents the way the office deals with pre-existences. The office wants to somehow create spaces which are never completely enclosed. You can see here like the courtyard with the cantina, and it's always a mix between an inner private space and something that has an immediate relation with its context. And during these 6 months I had the chance to work on 2 different projects, and in both occasions I had the chance to work on pre-existing buildings, and in particular I had a chance to follow one of stuff. Sorry. Stuff. Sorry. Okay. Okay. I had the chance to follow one of the most meaningful projects in Berlin for the office, considering the scale and the impact, which is the reconversion of the former Boxer brewery in Berlin. So the Boxer brewery in Berlin is actually a former production site, and there couldn't be a more appropriate place to talk about this than be here, because it's really a few hundred meters far away from here. And this building not only contributed to the development of the area more than 150 years ago, but witnessed more than 1 century of Berlin history. And what is interesting is that from the very beginning, this was a space for industrial production, a place for industrial production, but for willing of the very first owner, it was also a space that would contribute to the openness of the neighborhood. In fact, the site would host both production spaces, but also semi-public and public spaces such as a beer garden, as well as residences. And this mixture between leisure and work and semi-public life was an element that kept the site alive and connected to its neighborhood for the very first time of its history. We were talking about, of course, radical changes, and what happened during the war radically changed the site. And as you can notice, more than almost half of the site went destroyed, and unluckily, almost all the public amenities of the site were lost. After the Second World War, the site remained abandoned, despite a few changes in the ownership, and despite a few informal uses of its spaces. It remained abandoned until more or less 10 years ago, when the new owner, decided to give new life to this site. Give new life to the site by bringing the activities of its own firm, without losing the idea of the very first owner. Which means trying to bring back to this place both production, leisure, and public activities. if we consider the position and the size of the Bozzo Brewery in the neighborhood, it is evident at first sight that the impact of such a project is huge. First of all, because of size. If you compare the site to the major public squares or even parks of the area, you can see that at the moment, if we consider it to be closed, whether it's abandoned or in a construction site, it's a huge gap. But also, if we consider the dynamics of the neighborhood, and if we consider that this was the last untouched building in Prenzlauer Berg, it really represented the last chance to intervene in an area which had already been highly gentrificated. And this means that the willingness to maintain a public fund openness, so to say, in this building, really means that both the client, the owner, and the architect have been able to get together to the awareness of the impact of such redevelopment. The second thing it happened to notice to me, to notice, is that I didn't know Berlin, I didn't know the area, then I walked around, I talked to people, and I observed the neighborhood. And it doesn't only have a huge impact because of the site and the size of the site, but also because it represents a landmark. It represents a landmark because of the material. In the area there are a lot of, okay, we are here, so I don't need to explain it to you. In like 1 kilometer there are 3 farmer breweries, so the material represents a highly identity value, but also it represents a landmark. Here you can see the Pfefferberg chimney, so it's kind of an old network which is reconnecting together. And we were talking about recreating places which have been destroyed, recreating diversity, and this is what the overall master plan for the Bozzo Brewery is trying to reach by combining new volumes with the pre-existences and creating not only a new public garden, a new square, and a commission of spaces that merges a gap which has been there for almost 70 years. But there is always a but. So despite the long renovation process, and despite a few temporary usages through the, so you saw here the picture of the deep color club, and then other temporary usages like the Coco Bleu, the Populaire, and the recent opening of the cantina inside the site, what people perceive is something detached. So here you can see the view of the entrance from Prenzlauer Berg, and it is clearly obstacled. And also I was talking to people, and about only 1 out of 20 people living in the area knew what was going on there, or even knew Bozzo Brewery. It is felt like something enclosed, introverted, abandoned, and it is felt like a construction site, which is, but people don't know what is going on in the new while, and people don't know that the willingness is to open this space while the construction site going on, and to put another to awaken it before the construction is fully over. So it is within this framework that I developed a study, I would say, a project, a proposal, a vision. You can decide how you want to define this. And it's about unfolding the spaces and making people understand that they can use this site in a completely different way. So during the years, the office already had many proposals for the temporary use of the lager spaces of the Bozzo Brewery. The concept is also connected to idea to open the site on a street which has a more livable dimension, a more urban dimension, which is Salzburg-Strasse. From here, it is possible to access the former storage spaces of the Bozzo Brewery, which have an extension of more than 5,000 square meters, as you can see here, and they cover the size of two of the main buildings. So maybe from here it's not visible, but then we'll go through pictures, and the size of the space is really impressive. So open it and reactivate this urban fence, so to say, that wasn't used at the moment due to the construction site. Open it and reactivate the former address and unfold and reveal unexpected spaces. So the storage had many different kind of atmospheres, and we're going through them again, and here you can see how they were used for even art installation during years. And they are completely unused at the moment. And the thing is that through temporary uses, then it would be possible to create semi-public function to throw back these spaces into the collective imagination of the neighborhood, or anyhow in the daily living of people. And here we come to one of the main issues. So we're dealing with a monument which architecturally is already quite clear. And we are dealing with a temporary use where it's not the architecture that needs a function, because the monument is already there. So what does it mean to intervene in such a context? How is it possible to define a program that works? And is it the architectural intervention that is supposed to tell people how to use a space? So actually we were discussing about this, and the idea then was to go for a participatory approach. So we completely shifted the attention from just an architectural intervention to an approach where both architecture and process concord to the same aim. And this, of course, makes another question arise, which is, if the process is defining the usage of the space, then what is the architecture? Is it just infrastructure? What does it become? Does it concord to defining the space, or is it just there to support it somehow? So we're saying the space, it already has a character, although with different configurations, but it's quite clear. So the idea was to, yes, intervene with a light solution, light architectural solution, which were, yes, infrastructure, but infrastructure not only for plants or lighting, but infrastructure for support the fruition of these kind of spaces. At the same time, connecting the environment with what is going on the outside and the rest of the site. So the idea was to intervene with a modular scaffolding system that would at the same time enhance, in this case, in this pilot space, the rhythm of the vaulted ceilings, and at the same time create a space which could have been used in many different kind of ways. From a programmatic point of view, the space, the pilot space I just showed you, would then be able to be used independently as a space for events, or as a foyer to access to all the other spaces, or simply as distribution space. But what is interesting is that it's not the kind of architecture that we're putting there that defines this, but this is going to be up to a participatory process that is going to be found together with the people who want to use the space. So what we wanted to do wasn't actually to give a solution, but to open up a debate, a discussion, and to propose a few visions of a possible use of this kind of spaces, also to raise curiosity and stimulate the willingness of approach these kind of spaces in somehow a new way. And I try to tell this story also through a small, let's call it installation in the neighboring room that you are free to experience how you want. There is a video, there is journals, there is a written poetry. And the thing is that this story started in Milan, continued in Berlin, and it's not over yet. And what I would tell you to conclude this story is to invite you to walk down to South Buckelstrasse a bit more often by the end of the year, and to check until this door is going to be open. Thank you.
Thank you, Viola. Also, I'm very impressed what you have both worked on in only 6 months, and I also hope that you have more time also to explore also more of Berlin than the work at the two offices. I invite you now to come here and sit with us, including Thomas and Ulrich. Dear Thomas and Ulrich, both of your offices are operating in and around Berlin, but also intensively partly in the same countries and cities all around the world. While TSPA is looking on the reanimation of the public and urban space, the revitalization of metropolitan regions between Astana, Blankenburg and Cape Town, Chipperfield Architects are known for their careful refurbishments in Berlin city center, London, or Seoul, or elsewhere. So, just a few basic questions in regard to your collaboration with those with both laureates. As also we would like to invite you to ask questions from the audience to their experience they made. So, from how many different cultural backgrounds the question to Thomas and Ulrich both, from how many different cultural backgrounds your countries is your team, and what means exchange and change of perspective to your daily work?
Thank you for inviting us up here. Our team, we are not a big office, smaller than Chipperfield for sure, so it's not even a dozen people at the moment. Our team is very international. I have to say that recently some problems has been like problem that I'm currently the only person who's German as a mother tongue in our office. And it's quite international, it goes from South America to a lot of European countries, Netherlands, and Italy, of course, to some employees from North America at the moment. What does that mean for the exchange? Well, first of all, it's quite refreshing to have people and colleagues who all have different educations, and I do not only mean different education as some of them are urbanists, others architects, others are experts for management or resilience, but also that they come from different educational systems, and that can clearly be felt. The hyper-rationalism of the Dutch versus maybe a somewhat more poetic approach that you find in Italy, but maybe looking much more towards the back than the colleagues from the Netherlands, so forward. And that, to make it short, is quite inspiring, I find.
And do they find you, or you find them? How's they?
We don't currently need to find anyone. We are rather overwhelmed by an avalanche of applications every week, and while the office is growing fast, I could say too fast maybe even, we have a hard time to actually even look at all the applications. And we try to select the best people there. That's how it usually works. Of course, there's also always the network, but at the moment we really look to complete the team in a careful and balanced way.
Besides that, depending on the location you work on, that you have maybe specific people you, maybe I take by example the Mozambique thing, where maybe you identify people there also to come here to Berlin.
I need to say one thing about that work in very remote countries or countries which we usually don't know from our holidays. Of course, it would be impossible if we, as a German Berlin-based office, would think to be able to go to Mozambique, or not even all of the team can go there, and from Berlin to decide what is the best urban strategy for Ultimo Local. What do we know? Even if I've traveled to the country many times, it's still not sufficient. So it is absolutely crucial to always work together with a local team that really knows the intricacies of the culture, not even only about planning, but the communities, how processes work, etc. And yes, of course, we do work with people who then know the country. For example, we have, in this case, on our team, Evandro, who's a resiliency expert and who has lived for some time in Mozambique, and a former colleague of mine from the United Nations, Liz Peterson, who is a finance and urban economy expert, and she does also know the country. And together with a local team, then we think we are able to make the right propositions.
All right.
Yeah, same to us. Our office, I think, we around 140 people now in Berlin, and it's very, very important to have all this different influence and I think like 20, 30 different nations working in our office. And there we have this range of different projects, different countries we can work on. We have the office in Shanghai, in Milan, and London. So it's for each project we can, I think, look for the right people, and they are really ambitious to work on different projects. So it's for us a very good time now that architecture is a really big stuff in the city. Each project has a big resonance in the city, in the wherever. So it's in the project, people working like smaller project, bigger project, 5 people, 10 people, 40 people. We have this range of different culture, different experience, the access of what the people can bring into the process of designing, mostly the important phases to start the designs, the layout, and that's very interesting to see how it works together and how they're questioning and struggling even sometimes. It's a process which brings really forward.
So both studios, I mean, English is the main language, I suppose. The communication.
It depends on the project. Even that's a Viola was the only first foreign, because it was very important that she came to the project, so we get the chance to get rethink even things we do on the project, and to have the questioning, what could it be beyond, what could it be different, because it was we are very proud to have in our office, because it was this bringing in new questions and asking about, could we see it a different way?
Okay, this was my next question. Was it a kind of Italian impact in your work?
Maybe the person at all. She's very, very openness and heartfully. So we really enjoy to work with her and to get this directly access to the project. And then like she started with her task, I had no clue in the beginning what the idea of the program and what's going on, because I thought Christopher, one of our directors, got this link to to Aedes, and he told me, okay, she's Italian and she will start in Bertolini, she should work on a reuse restoration project. So, okay, let's see. And finally, we realized, okay, there's a person, really self-confident, really a lot of energy, and she's doing her own work. And that was really nice to see how she took her task and started and created her own project in our project.
If the Mozambican project wouldn't be a Mozambican project, it would certainly be an Italian project. As we have, besides Valentina, two other Italian colleagues working on the project. But I would really like to go beyond the cliche that this is somehow typical Italian or something like that. I already said this, maybe the education being more concerned with the heritage than elsewhere. But to be honest, we do not feel that in this project. It is rather the minds of the individual colleagues who are shaping the project in that case, and not so much a certain common point of view.
Of course. And Valentina and Viola, independently from your work and experience, I mean intense experience at the both architecture office, what other influences and inspirations you did find in Berlin, if there were some time left? So what are you taking home to say now? I mean, the question, what are you taking home from Berlin? And maybe also in an addition, what are you taking home from your experience at the offices?
For me, this experience was important because it was not only for the city. The city is different from the city where I come from, and I would not repeat myself again. But the city is so innovative, and this is the thing that I appreciated most here in Berlin. And so I would like to bring a bit of this innovative style in Italy, in Naples, if it's possible. And about the office, yes, I like these combination of different people working together and sharing different ideas, because we all come from different cultures. And this was the most important thing for me, because sharing ideas with people that come from all over the world is not always possible. And so the international climate that I feel here is very important to me, and this is for me the most important experience, because it is a different city, but it is a different environment at the same time, with the people that I have to work with every day.
Okay, so to select is not easy, but if I have to think about Berlin as a city, the first thing I remember is that after 2 days, I already felt kind of comfortable, which is not, it's not given when you move and you change your environment. And then I realized that maybe it's because of the different dimensions that you can experience in Berlin all at the same time. So we are both living in the nearby of Sagenaplatz in Friedrichshain, which is a super cozy neighborhood. And then every morning I have to walk out and go to the Juven, and I'm in Frankfurt I live. And then I see this huge street, and then the TV tower, and then I move to the office and the environment changes again. So it's like you can choose which kind of city you want to experience. And that is something that I haven't found in many places, although I haven't traveled so much, but a bit. And I think that is what made me feel comfortable from the very beginning. And from the office, well, in Milan I was working in an office which was a bit smaller, and also I was doing a PhD, which means that I was pretty used to work alone, which can be good if you have a task to develop, but it's also sometimes a bit difficult when you are in an office with 140 people. And then you have to learn how to work together, how to listen to them, how to merge all the tasks together. But I have to say that, like, the beginning of the office, although then I worked on another project too, was with the team of the Vodka brewery, and this kind of cooperation was very clear to me from the very beginning, and the cooperation has been to me something like that couldn't have worked better. The team has been just welcoming with, okay, a bit difficulties with German maybe, and then eventually I convinced it to switch to English sometimes, but no. And apart from the jokes, I also mentioned it in the small presentation. I think that the philosophy of the office in always reaching and trying to develop a positive public impact through each single project, whether it is a retail project, a public commission, that is impressive, and that is something that is really clear in every single work, I think.
Mr. Raitani, have you already, I would say, made the first evaluation at what you will discuss with your colleagues from the Foreign Ministry about the second concurso?
No evaluation. No.
And
time for evaluation.
maybe there are some questions from the audience before I invite you. Then we have a look to those presentations and have a glass of wine together. So now or never. Experiences, questions, and more questions from you guys.
I have many questions, but we do that with a glass of wine.
Okay, then thank you for joining us here on the panel. Thank you for the great presentation. I think we have done amazing work, and so let's share a glass of wine and your presentation.